Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're dialing in from. We had almost 500 people sign up for this. And so we have no idea how many are going to actually join, but we will make the recording available to everybody. I'm Nicole Sanchez. Hi, this is my friend Cate. I'm going to have her introduce herself in a second. But just so you know who's running you through this today, I've been working on helping people build strong organizational culture professionally for 26 years this July. And remote work is one of my favorite things to teach people how to do. This is called a crash course specifically because folks are being forced into this due to coronavirus, COVID-19, which is not ideal. Obviously, nobody wants that to happen. But what we're here to do is give you some real quick tips and tricks, some concepts to work with as you move into remote management. Because when done poorly, people can get hurt in remote management and you can lose people. So attrition can go through the roof, and presumably with everything going on, you want to hold on to your talent. And so I'm dialing in from Berkeley, California, where I live. And I run my own consulting firm. It's called Vaya Consulting, V-A-Y-A. And we help organizations and companies do this mostly in tech, although we've also started to try our hand in other industries, and it's gone pretty well. So if you're interested in things that we do beyond free crash courses in remote management, please reach out after this is over. This is something we're considering a service to our community because we care very much about people coming out of this relatively unscathed, aside from sickness. And so if your job can keep going and you can keep progressing in your work and your career, and your managers can help you do that, then great, win, win, win. I'm going to hand it over to my friend Cate to introduce herself, and then we'll tell you about our special guests.
Thanks, Nicole. So I'm Cate. I work at Automattic, the people who bring you WordPress.com, Jetpack, various other things, also the WordPress mobile apps, mainly built by automaticians. I love them, and I'm here at their meetup. So I had to sneak out and steal somebody's conference room and construct a temporary laptop stand. But it's all good. I'm so happy to be here with Nicole and all of you. My job at Automattic has generally been running engineering teams and making sure that they can deliver really well. And part of that kind of good delivery is normally the engineering team being happy. For the past year, I've been working on a little more nebulous team. We own a number of things, including our developer hiring process. And so every developer that joins Automattic comes through us and is supported by our team, including through their onboarding. We also own all the leadership development at Automattic. So I spend a lot of time with team leads, helping support them, support their teams in a fully distributed work environment.
Thanks so much, Cate. I'm also joined by my longtime collaborator and colleague, Amanda Gallender. Do you want to just say hi, talk about what you do at Vaya a little bit?
Hey everyone, I'm calling in from Amsterdam, and yeah, at Vaya I am Nicole's content partner, so I help build out a lot of the teachable materials that we get to use with our clients.
Thanks, Amanda. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, Jeff Rosick in Boulder, Colorado. As you can see right out my top floor window here. I was with Cate and our outstanding apps team in Chicago until late last night. But I'm really happy to make it back in time to join. And I work in marketing for Automattic, and one of our big focus is on the employee experience, since we're a fully remote and distributed company. So very happy to meet and learn from everyone today.
Cool. And we've got Danilo, who likes to lurk in the background. He's our resident engineer who just sent y'all an emoji. He will jump in if anybody wants him to. I am certain, or if he has something that he'd like to say. Unless it's right now, but it's okay if it's not. Because I promised him he wasn't going to have to be on camera. So, all right, cool. Well, we're going to get right into content. Please use that functionality at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. And we will, so Jeff and Amanda's job is to really prompt us with questions. Once I start sharing my screen, I won't be able to see the chat or the questions. So y'all will need to direct the traffic. It's one of the tricks about Zoom here. And I'm gonna get right into the content. I'm gonna drive content and Cate's gonna interrupt me as needed and add her 2 cents. And then we're gonna spend most of our time on Q&A because when folks registered, we had, I think of the almost 500 people who registered, we had about 230 questions. We're obviously not gonna be able to get to them today. So a couple of things. One, we picked out questions that we thought were well represented. So, the same question asked a handful of times. So we're going to stick with those first. Then ones that were particularly applicable to this time of crisis as people are shutting down offices. And not a whole lot on like, how do I build for the long term? We want to do those questions. And the way that we're going to actually keep the conversation going is on Twitter by using RFRW, Ready for Remote Work. So we'll take more of those questions and put them on Twitter and answer them. And if you have additional questions, we'll keep the conversation going with that hashtag RFRW. You can see our handles there. Cate and I do a lot of our work communicating with our communities on Twitter. So I'm NM Sanchez and Cate is Cate HSTN. And feel free to reach out to us there. We're both pretty active. And again, thank you so much for spending this next hour with us. I'm gonna launch right into content now. There are 4 main areas that you as a manager need to be aware of when it comes to remote management. Some of it is the same as when you're in person. You just have to kind of execute differently. Some of it is very different. And so the 4 main category areas that we're going to cover are deadlines and deliverables, setting and context, communication, and engagement. And let's start with deadlines and deliverables. The first question we are always asked about remote work is, how do I make sure people are really working 40 hours a week? And the answer is, you cannot. That is I'm just going to say it, it's a fool's errand to try and figure out if somebody's actually sitting in front of their computer for 40 hours. And in fact, it restricts some of the really lovely things that happen as a result of remote work, meaning people can do things like work according to their own schedule, the schedule of their family, work according to when their brains are turned on versus, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, for me, my brain is really starting to be exhausted and I can get a lot more done in the morning. Obviously, we're talking about knowledge workers. I don't love that framing, but that's sort of what workplace conversations categorize us as. Office workers, usually people who are either doing professional services, including building software. That's really what we're talking about. Obviously, this becomes more difficult when we talk about things like janitorial staff, food service workers, security, people who work at front desks of office. And so one of the things that we would really like to, we beseech you to find out what's going on with those folks in your company if your office is shutting down. Because this is something that's going to disproportionately hit people from lower income backgrounds and with lower wage earning jobs. Hourly workers are going to get hit the hardest. So if you are somebody who is salaried and in a more secure position, can really raise the question in your company about what is happening to those folks. I'm very happy to report that all of my clients are continuing to pay their contingent workers even if they've shut their office. And so that's a really important thing here. But other than folks who really work 40 hours a week to support an office running, 40 hours a week is no longer on the table. All right. So instead, what you have to do is start working on deadlines and deliverables and be really clear with people what they're on the hook for so that they can plan their lives accordingly. You need to scope the work as you would for a consultant and be really clear about, I need this by then. The team needs this by then. Also, stay true to your project management tools that you already use. Now is not really the time to introduce something new unless you're going to spend a lot of time just introducing that something new. But when people are leaving, let's say you're always using shared Google Docs as a way of helping people keep track of projects. Now is not a time to say, okay, but automatically learn Asana, which is another project management tool that a lot of folks in tech use. Unless the project you're trying to get people to deliver is learn Asana, it's not a great time to introduce something brand new on project management tracking. The last piece is use the same systems of accountability you always use. That is, don't change your style. What you're already good at is what we need you to do more just over distance. We'll talk a little bit about the technology of over distance in a minute. But pro tip on scoping work, it's a great time to catch up on things like documentation, going back and organizing your drives, all kinds of things that, the types of projects that get put off for a really long time because nobody has the uninterrupted time to do it. Very rarely, if you're sitting in an office together, can you sit down and just, I think if there are a lot of engineers on this call, I think you know this problem very well, that you need lots of uninterrupted time in order to really deliver your work. And so I'm going to ask Cate to add any color to this that she'd like, but deadlines and deliverables is the first paradigm that we want you to get your head around.
Yeah, I totally agree with Nicole. I think it's important to also note that sometimes people will work more than 40 hours a week and like actually way beyond. And it's hard sometimes for people to create those boundaries between their personal life and their work life. And so, you don't just need to be making sure that people are delivering what they need to. You need to be also paying attention that they're working sustainably. And I think similarly on the like an uninterrupted time, I love it. Everyone can start getting through their feedback requests whilst we're all like locked down, because we all work from home during perf season anyway. That's what I remember from Google anyway. But that doesn't, we still need that human connection, right? And we still need to be collaborating and working together and talking to each other. And so that's why the other sections in this talk are like really important to balance out this one. I think it's very easy for tech managers to be very focused on the deadlines and deliverables and how do we maintain those whilst people work remotely, but we could easily do that at the expense of people's engagement with their work, of their like personal lives and like balance and their general happiness, and that will not serve us over the longer term.
Thanks, Cate. I just want to remind people who are jumping on, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to jump in there and ask your question. And we've got a couple people who are on to help us navigate those questions and know when they're being asked. Jeff, Amanda, and Danilo are helping us do that. All right, so deadlines and deliverables. First paradigm shift. Number of hours worked does not equal getting your work done anymore on remote work. And that works both for fewer than 40 hours a week and most importantly for more than 40 hours a week, because like Cate said, people will, if work is right in front of you all the time, I think somebody tweeted this at you yesterday, Cate, it ends up becoming homing from work instead of working from home. So we also don't want that. All right, number 2, settings and context. All right, look, not everybody's set up to work from home. I am very fortunate in that I have a whole office in my house with a door. It's got windows. I'm the only one who works in here. And that is like the height of work from home privilege. A lot of people who are being asked to work from home for the first time right now are not set up to do so. And so honestly, our big tip here is be cool. You got dogs barking, you got kids napping or screaming, you got low Wi-Fi signals, no bars, somebody at your door, your neighbors coming in, your spouse needs something from you. All of that is now happening for people in real time at work. And they may be working from the kitchen table. They may be working from their couch. The other thing that's really important is if this goes on for a long time, we will need to advocate for people to have more ergonomic setup in their home, because people will physically get hurt if they're sitting on a couch working on their laptop for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I'm sure there are plenty of people on this call right now who have experienced that, where all of a sudden you go, well, that arm never hurt me before. And it's because you've been sitting in an improperly sized chair, desk, couch, whatever it is. And just remember, it's going to take time for people to settle into working from home. And some people are not going to enjoy it. As much as I love working from home, I am fortunate to have a setup where I can close everything else out. Not everybody will. So use your empathy. If you're in a meeting and there is a baby crawling all over somebody who's trying to stay on video and stay in the meeting, by all means, let the person like step away and handle what they need to handle. And let's not treat it like it's some betrayal of work. This is unprecedented for a lot of folks, and that's just going to be the reality. Cate, you want to add anything to this one?
Yeah, I love everything that you're saying. I think the thing that I worry about, even as somebody who does remote from work from home and has done for like a really long time, is that if I'm not allowed to leave the house anymore, I will probably start to lose my mind. That just being trapped in your home is generally just very stressful. Even if your home is perfect, beautiful, you could be an interior designer and you do have your own office with the door that can shut. And so I think kind of being sympathetic to people struggling not just with the logistics, but struggling with emotionally and struggling with isolation. The other thing I notice as a longtime manager of distributed workers is that the office provides a really helpful boundary sometimes between people's work and people's lives. And when people are struggling in their personal life for whatever reason, like maybe they're going through a divorce, or maybe they have a sick relative, or they're just struggling in some other way, they no longer have that distance that the commute creates for them. And so they're much more likely to be bringing that baggage to work.
I think Cate froze. I'm going to keep going. I used to be a VP at GitHub, which had the majority of our workforce was always distributed. And we used to talk about this thing called, I think it was called, let me make sure we're good on. We used to have a thing just called remote paranoia. And in addition to the stressors of home, when you're away from central information, sorry, Cate, I'll let you finish that thought in a second. When you are remote for a while and away from centralized information, people start to tell stories to themselves that may or may not be true. For example, we're going to talk about communication in a second. My manager hasn't reached out to me all week. I have not talked to her. Am I getting fired? And this used to happen quite often when people were removed from any kind of centralized information. And so that's why the additional parts are going to be so helpful for that sort of psychological safety as well. Cate, please finish your thought.
You know what? I did finish my thought, but the hotel Wi-Fi stole it. So I don't know. What did you get up to?
And then sometimes there's technical difficulties.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit more about those communications as we keep going. All right, let's see. So communication must be predictable and consistent. When we are co-located, we rely so much on face-to-face, happenstance, unprogrammed kind of, just running into people in the hallway over lunch. And that isn't going to happen anymore. And so it's time to re-clarify what different systems of communication mean for your team, and then stay really, really clear about them. So on my team, for example, we use Slack, and I know a lot of folks in tech use Slack or some other chat app. I strongly recommend installing and normalizing a chat app for whatever group of people you're working with in this time when you are not co-located. I'm not sure how I would get it done without Slack or something like that, because everything doesn't warrant a face-to-face online video conversation. And there's something in between a face-to-face video conversation and let me immediately call you on the phone, which we know, especially for millennials and those younger, is, can be seen as an affront. Don't call my phone. I don't know you like that. These are some of the social norms we're going to have to communicate to each other and sort of work out. But Slack is kind of that perfect medium. It's just real-time chat app where people can ask questions and expect answers in a reasonable amount of time. So Slack is for things I need in the next 3 hours, right? I need information from my team, or I need a reaction to something. Text is for, this is immediate. I am now texting something to your phone, and I know you're going to pick it up and see it. It needs to be something that is much more urgent than something on Slack. Because if we reserve everything for text, it just becomes so much noise and so intrusive that people end up not having the ability to sort of filter the signal through the noise if your text is just popping all the time. Email ends up being really great for things like longer, more voluminous conversations, or when you have to have a long-term record of a conversation or a set of decisions that you're making, right? So you have a searchable record on email. Internal posts, like if you have an internal wiki or you have some kind of board that people can use, Workplace or something like that, you can put things on there and just say, this is just FYI. These are just FYIs, or we want people's opinions over a long period of time. And then video conferencing is for when there's no other way to exchange information, but also for making sure that people stay connected to each other, because there is no replacement for face-to-face. There just isn't. One of the things we're worried about right now for folks who do this kind of work is that the pipes are going to get clogged. And we're going to have a lot of people running things like Zoom in neighborhoods that are not used to having that level of broadband need of bandwidth. And so make sure you have backups. And if Zoom starts to not work for you, there are a whole bunch of hacks like turn your video off. The minute you turn your video off, it ends up, creating some capacity in your bandwidth. And so removing, turning video off, turning Slack off also. Slack takes up a lot of bandwidth while you're also on Zoom. For those of you who've done this a lot, you know that sometimes you got to close your Slack app because it's just very robust. And then most importantly, establish your regular cadence. Are you going to have daily stand-ups via video? Are you going to have an every other day check-in? Are you going to keep your weekly team meetings? If anything, make those more frequent, because people start to feel very disconnected from each other. And like I said on the last slide, start to tell stories about what's going on with their employment when they haven't talked to their manager. My manager hasn't talked to me this week. She hasn't reached out to me. She's not answering my emails. Then we see each other's faces and everybody goes, okay, I feel much better. I just needed some more signal that you still know I'm here. I still know you're there, and I'm still okay and in good standing with my work. And so this communication has to be your job as the manager to consistently drive predictable communication and be like directing traffic really around how information is flowing. It's gonna take people a little while to learn, but once they do and they understand the rules of the road, it makes things much smoother and makes people feel much more confident in their roles at work. Cate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing it's worth noting is that if you're going to change your regular check-in cadence, you should talk about why that is. So, for example, I try to talk to all of my directs every day. And initially I just did this, and then I got this feedback that I was like freaking people out by just pinging them and asking how they were, because they hadn't had that from their previous manager. And so now I try to be really explicit with it and to say like, look, I just wanted to check in every day and say hi. And especially if they're in a later time zone to me, I'll say like, will you just ping me when you come online so that we can so that we exchange a couple of sentences? Because otherwise it's very easy for they come online in the busiest part of my day. I'm talking to 10 different people at once, and then it will get to the end of the day and I they'll be at lunch, or I will just be done with the day and I won't want to have another conversation. So I think it's really important to kind of, if you're going to make an adjustment, to say that you're going to make an adjustment and why it is, so that people don't get anxious about it. The other thing about text-based communication is that it's a great equalizer. And this is fantastic in so many ways. You might discover that the person who you thought was really quiet and didn't contribute as much as you really wanted them to is all of a sudden writing these epic things that are really great. And this is one of the amazing things about text-based communication, is that it is so much more introvert friendly. The other side of that equalization is that all text-based communication can seem kind of equal because you're missing those kind of signals. So the kind of throwaway remark that somebody makes in a hallway, if they make that same throwaway remark on Slack, it can easily become much more important, much more impactful. People can drop what they're working on and think that it was an order and it wasn't just a question or an observation. So making sure that even as you move to your more text-based communication, you also think about how you structure it and that you're very clear about what this is replacing and what you want to get out of it. Sometimes the document you're putting together, it might be replacing a really kind of formal presentation type meeting, and then you're looking for input at the end. Whereas sometimes you might be trying to kind of facilitate a discussion in a text-based format instead. And it's really important that you're clear about what you want to get out of these things, and that you help people understand the kind of response and contribution that's really welcome there.
The other thing that's really fun, I think about for me about Slack, I've been inside probably 100 tech companies over the last few years, is that a company can form a lot of personality over Slack or some other chat app. I personally prefer Slack, but I know that people have lots of questions about things like privacy and security, and your IT folks are going to have to work that out with you. But I choose Slack, and the fun part is for me that people can be extremely funny, like you said, Cate, and you didn't know because in writing they're hilarious. They can be really insightful. It can give people time to react to things in ways that's different than if you're in an in-person meeting. And if somebody is a person who likes to sit and sort of really process something before responding, Slack is lovely for that. It's also a great team building tool. It can be a culture building tool. And folks, don't believe me often when I say this, but I will. Every single company I've been to above a certain size, because I also work with startups, I would say it's about 20, every single company I've been in has a single Slack channel that is the same in every single company, and it's not pets. Cate, do you want to guess what it is? Have I already told you this? Every single company has a Slack channel about this. socially? No. It's The Bachelor. It's The Bachelor. Literally the
Is that
TV.
a TV show? Oh my God. I'm going to have to see if we have that slot.
I'm sure you do.
Jeff can check and then report back because I'm a little bit distracted right now.
I am certain that you do. Okay, so maybe if Automattic doesn't, it's gonna be the first one. But it's really. I go in when I'm doing sort of cultural assessments with companies, and one of the things I like to poke into is the Bachelor channel, because what you find is a huge diversity of people who otherwise would not be talking to each other, or wouldn't be hanging out with each other, or wouldn't be having lunch together, or don't work together day to day. But the Bachelor ends up becoming this beautiful equalizer of all these people who just love that show. And it really showed me how people were using Slack to build community around things that had nothing to do with work, but still created those like shared cultural touch points, the ties that bind, especially when you're bringing a diverse group of people together to try and accomplish something. So that's the bit on communication. Must be predictable and consistent, except for my last thing that I am begging all of you managers. If I can ask you to do one thing, if there's just one thing you take away from this, do your one-on-ones. Do your one-on-ones, do your one-on-ones. Because nothing takes the place of a manager and a direct report talking about how work is going. Not just the tasks, but how are you experiencing work? What is blocking you? What are your aspirations? What kind of skills do you want to build? Do you have feedback for me as your manager? I have feedback for you as your manager. And if you have never run really robust one-on-ones, this is the only shameless plug in the whole thing. Or I guess we already talked about our companies up front. Second shameless plug, it's free. Danilo is the lead developer on this and co-designer of Digamo, which is the one-on-one tool that my team has put together to help you keep track of all your direct reports and the kinds of things you should be talking to them about regularly. And so if you have any questions about that, you can definitely hit us up later. But digamo.app, download it. It's only for iOS at the moment, but not iOS, only for a Mac app at the moment. And just please do something to have robust one-on-ones. But I preach that all the time. So there you go. All right. Engagement. So this is the last of the four areas. Here's the deal with engagement. When remote work is done well and when managers are really confident in how they are managing folks over distance, engagement actually increases, which is really interesting. And it's a recent phenomenon that the sort of organizational behaviorists have been researching, that remote work actually makes people feel more connected when they know what their connection points are. Imagine if you are, have social anxiety, or don't want to have a long commute, and you've got a long commute and you come into work. You do better under flexible circumstances with your time. These are things that are lending higher reports of engagement, like literally on employee engagement surveys, when folks feel like they're more in control of their own lives. And it makes sense. It's not the same for everybody, but there is no indication that remote work, when done well, loses people. People will say, decreases engagement. People will say, I prefer to work in the office, but they will not report feeling less engaged if the work is being handled well by the manager. And so if you are currently struggling with engagement or retention issues, now is a time to actually double down on the level of engagement that you're doing that doesn't necessarily have to do with work all the time, right? Or doesn't have to be some formally worded email that says, here are all the things I've pre-thought for you today to do. Sometimes it's small talk and casual check-ins. Sometimes it's, I read this article and I'm slacking it to you, or I'm emailing it to you because it made me think of you. Sometimes it's a GIF, not gift, GIF, GIF. Sometimes it's a GIF and you go, oh my goodness, it's a GIF. And Slack has a great GIF plugin for that. I may be showing my age, but I don't care because it works. And so when engagement is emphasized, we see engagement on all levels. Like, I see you. Engagement just means, do you feel seen? Do you feel heard? Do you feel like people are valuing you? Increases because we can be very strategic about our engagement, and then it's meaningful in one-on-one and you don't have a million distractions around you. The big one here is managers don't hide. Just because we're all working remote now unexpectedly doesn't mean that it's a great time for managers to be like, oh, whew, I don't have to deal with those people now. Now more than ever is the time to lean into your relationships with your direct reports and really make sure that they are seen by you, and that you are thinking about them and reaching out to them proactively. Cate, I know you had a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think you covered the like important work focused areas of engagement. And so I just wanted to come back to the topic of like making sure that people still feel that emotional connection to their colleagues, and that there's still some of the kind of chit chat that really does like build connection and that some people really need. So make sure, for example, that you have water cooler channels and then actually use them. So a couple of like nice rituals that I've seen teams have is, one is we call it What's Up Monday. So on Monday, we ask people, you know, how their weekend was, if they did anything exciting. The other thing is like maybe on Fridays, as the week winds down, we'll kind of introduce some like really random discussion topics, like what's a cool photo that you've taken recently, or what's a great movie that you've seen, and just kind of talk about stuff that's totally unimportant but is actually important for building that emotional connection. On my team, I got some feedback on Twitter about this, so like don't take it as a total recommendation, but whenever anybody joins our water cooler channel, like they join our team, we say like, what animal would you prefer to be eaten by? And like people give the most fascinating answers. So like my favorite was someone who said he wanted to be eaten by a snail, and like I'm still thinking about this. Is it like a really large scale snail? Is he just committing to like a really long term? Anyway, but just kind of have a little bit of fun. You know, I like really love raccoons, and so people will put raccoons in our water cooler channel and we'll like discuss the raccoons. And it just gives us a bit of a, you know, a way to say like, oh, well, we don't just work together, you know, we're also kind of having fun together.
Yeah, I think there are some people in chat pointing this out, like our monthly team calls. This is Matt. We always dedicate 15 minutes for small talk, vacation photos, bucket list discussion, fun stuff. And small talk really matters because it's the thing that you'll lose if the only thing you do is get online, you know, and look at each other in a meeting and go, okay, now we will run the meeting. That doesn't feel right to most people. And it doesn't give you a sense for where folks are at. And if you can't see them, if you can't be around them and read more cues about their day, you have to be, it's almost like, so one of the things that I really love about working with folks in the past, especially engineers who are on the autism spectrum, really taught me that you have to be explicit. I'm thinking of one engineer in particular. She taught me you have to be really explicit in telling me how you're feeling, because I just don't read facial expressions. I can't read facial expressions. So if you like what I did, you have to say, I really like what you did and here's why. If you want me to stop doing something, you have to say, stop doing that. I need you to do something else. And it really is a translatable skill to working remotely, because you end up having people who are all on mute. You know, they mute their microphones, and then you say, all right, is everybody in agreement? Well, what do? You end up doing things like people need to nod deeply and give you thumbs up, or raise their hand and go, you know, wait, I have sort of timeout, you know, like you really end up using some gestures, and you can pick some on your team that are universal. Somebody just pointed out correctly that the Bachelor isn't available or isn't interesting all over the world. So depending on what your country, and that was a very American viewpoint, depending on the country that you're in, it might be something else. Find that something else. One of the ones that was suggested to me when I was doing this training the other day was they do, their team does regular Spotify playlists. Like they collaborate on a Spotify playlist, and it will have a theme. So their last theme was 8th grade dance, or like middle school dance songs. Another was what's your walk-up song? Like you're coming on stage or you're gonna come up to bat. What is your, you know, what is the song that you want the whole stadium to hear as you're walking up to the plate? They're fun. Somebody just says we use musicleague.app for themed Spotify playlists. Like, look, you're going to have to be, if you're not a fun person and you're a manager right now, you're going to have to learn a little bit of fun. You're going to have to learn how to infuse a little bit of fun in here. And I really want to thank the person who said, as an autistic person, I often feel that on remote communications, everyone is sort of autistic until they learn how to fit real life levels of communication into much smaller bandwidth. this is such a beautiful way of saying, you know, what I was clunkily saying, in that we do have to be a little over exaggerated with each other. We do have to make sure that we are nodding and encouraging each other in ways that we take for granted when we're co-located.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point about like making sure that you're also doing the positive things, right? Like I fully believe that every manager, if they see something that needs to be corrected, they're going to send a ping and be like, oh, hey, you know, think about doing this. But actually, like, do we give positive feedback the same level of importance? And there's a couple of things that I do to make sure that I'm continually reaching out to people and saying like, oh, this was good. So the first thing would be to give people much more specific positive compliments, because they're not going to get the same kind of warmth from you in person. So like, instead of being like, Nicole, you did a great job, I would be like, Nicole, like I am in awe of how you like run this webinar and how warm you are. And you really could be a great breakfast TV show host. I think you have missed your career vacation. And so you can see how that's like much more specific. And then, you know, something we do on the kind of the mobile team at Automattic is that every month we put up a post for snaps, and people have to say something they did that they were proud of, something that somebody else did on the team that they were grateful for, and something that somebody off the team did that they were grateful for. And then it kind of surfaces more of that appreciation and everyone can see it. So just make sure that you build your positive reinforcements and that you work on giving positive feedback better, because to the point about like the warmth not coming across, like a great job is not going to cut it in text.
The other fun thing to note here is that because my specific expertise is in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and often that means everybody can be speaking the same language, everybody can be speaking English, but in 17 different ways to try and get a point across. And one thing that I learned about written communication, this was at GitHub, we had engineers in Germany, we had engineers in the United States, and they were doing code review for each other. And a high compliment, I hope there's some German engineers on here, a high compliment from a German engineer was, I see nothing wrong with this, or this is good. And American engineers would say, I think that person really didn't like what I did. And so it took a while for us to realize that, oops, sorry. Sorry. It took a while for us to realize that a very high compliment in one cultural context did not read in another cultural context. And so we had to build a bridge that said, it wasn't like you have to learn how to communicate like this. It was more about the deeper explanation of saying, that's a high compliment coming from this person. And a high compliment coming from you is awesome, emoji, high five, amaze balls, whatever else. And that you're both trying to get at the same thing. And like Cate, the European, is going like this. And you're saying the same thing to each other, but it's very, very different. And so you need some time for people to settle into what's behind that. And don't let people go too long assuming that they understand what the other person meant. Just get on a quick face-to-face with them and go, oh, what was that? No, that was great. Oh, I thought there was something wrong with it because you said, I see nothing wrong with this. And the German engineer says, I see nothing wrong with this. I don't understand. I just told you, I literally see nothing wrong with this. So you'll need time to work some of that stuff out. Cate, do you want to add to that?
No, I'm just thinking like how often I say like, I'm complimenting you. It just sounds like I hate you because I'm British. But yeah, I'm trying. I'm really working at being more naturally positive and engaging. It's just not always going that well.
It's lovely. And then we all have to learn how to hear each other as well as talk to each other. So I think it's going very well. Plus,
yeah.
Compliment. And I'm thinking, is 47 too late to have a morning show?
Look, I think you can have your morning show, Nicole. Like I am like, I'm standing for you on this topic. Like I fully believe in you.
Ready for remote work, morning show. All right, let's keep going. So Cate, this is something that folks asked us and we get asked a lot. What are some tips for running meetings efficiently over distance? Please talk about engineering meetings and then I can talk about others.
Yeah, so you know what, I'm an engineer and I truly love efficiency, but sometimes I'm like, why is efficiency your goal here? right? Because actually you want your meetings to be effective, which means going into the meeting, you need to know what you're hoping to achieve in this meeting. Is it your team call? And you're like, actually, like, you're not looking for efficiency, right? You're looking for the team to have a connection and like a knowledge of what each other are doing and an ability to work together. Are you trying to make a decision? You know, because then you want to be making a good decision, not just the most efficient decision, which means you need to create space for people's opinions and make sure that you have kind of considered all the different aspects about it. So I'm saying, like, my tip for running meetings effectively, I'm rejecting the word efficient, I'm sorry to the question asker, is to go into the meeting with a very clear idea of what you want to achieve from it, and then design the experience to achieve your desired outcome. And I think this is true regardless of whether the meeting is co-located or not. The thing is that when we are running a distributed culture and time together is at a premium, that's when we start questioning it. But there's a lot of meetings happening in offices. Well, I guess not anymore, but up until a couple of days ago, a lot of pointless meetings with no clear outcome were happening in offices everywhere. You're muted, Nicole.
Sorry, that was great. You covered a lot, and we have a lot of questions in the queue. So I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to take one from the Q&A on here. Are there some common signs that denote a lack of engagement in employees besides retention rate or an explicit announcement by an employee that they're feeling a lack of engagement? Does this differ between small and larger companies? Love this question. This question takes me back to do your one-on-ones, do your one-on-ones, do your one-on-ones, do your one-on-ones. And I know that I'm shamelessly plugging my app, but it really helps you ask questions that would get at levels of engagement and gets you to reflect on, how does this person seem to me? Am I reading the situation correctly? And you know, in looking at trends over time, one of two things can be happening. Either the person is really telling you that they're feeling disengaged in lots of different key ways, or you're misinterpreting what's happening. Either way, there's something that needs to be solved there. And so when employees answer questions like, if you ask, what's blocking you from completing your goals? And an employee keeps saying that they're just frustrated by the bureaucracy, frustrated by the bureaucracy, frustrated by the bureaucracy, it's a good indication that this person is starting to give up and go, you know, if they say they're frustrated, okay, frustrated, how can I remove blocks? You can tell when people are like actively engaged in solving a problem versus they're starting to give up. And we help lead you through some of that in keeping notes that are really clear about those topics, so that you can see, we have like little emoji sentiments that you can add, and you start to see, okay, wait, the last 4 times I've met with this person, they've told me this is their problem, or they've told me that they feel frustrated, or they told me that they feel angry, or they've told me that they feel like they feel like leaving. And if you can track that over time, you will have the information you need. If you're doing your one-on-ones faithfully and always holding them in basically the same way, you will be able to track that information over time and start to see trends that tell you that engagement is on the decline. Cate, did you want to add anything to that?
I think you covered it great. The only thing I would add is people's work habits often shift when their morale changes. Like, I've seen this in offices, I've seen this in a remote context. People just start coming in later and later and later. And then kind of once you notice that shift, to kind of have a conversation with them. You know, one time I had this conversation with somebody, I was like, look, I've noticed this. You used to start work at like 8 o'clock for you, and now it's 10, and I don't really care, but I want to know what changed that. And then he was like, yeah, I was just dreading this thing and having to talk to this person, and all this kind of stuff came out that, you know, even though we've been having those one-on-ones and we've been talking about it, and we've been talking about the logistics of what he was doing and how he was finding it hard, it wasn't till I noticed that and we had that conversation that the emotional toll it was taking on him was really clear.
Yeah, and I think that the indications don't change between big companies and large companies. What they are is easier to hide in larger companies. So when you're in a startup and you've only got 20 people in your office, somebody being disengaged is really, really obvious to several people. When you're in a company of 20,000, it takes a lot longer unless you have a very attentive manager. I'm gonna keep going through questions. How do you handle one-on-ones over time zones? In this case, 9 hours difference. Is it okay to ask them to switch to late and early meeting times, or should I take the hit as the manager? Cate, as someone who is based in Europe, what do you say to this?
Yeah, I think you should have a conversation about it, because the way that people like to run their day changes. And you should have an ongoing conversation about it and whether it's working for you. So I have somebody who reports to me in Australia, and, you know, we've gone back and forth on how that works for us. And especially when I travel, we do different things. But one of the things that we shifted to was just moving moving to WhatsApp. And so I would normally get up early, and then I would text with them when I was like on the way to the gym, or maybe we would do a quick call, and it just allowed us to check in more regularly on top of our regular one-on-one. And that was like the result of an ongoing conversation of like, we're trying to do this. I don't feel like our overlap is good. You know, I don't want you to feel like you have to stay up too late. But for me, you know, when I start my day, like that's it until I end my day. And I also have to overlap with Americans. So can we find a compromise that's working for us both? And, you know, like one of the failure modes I've seen with managers of remote teams is that they do think that it is their job to take the hit on everything as a manager. And so I'll find them doing team calls at 2 or 3 in the morning for them. And then guess what? Like pretty soon after that, we'll be having a conversation about how they don't want to be a team lead anymore, right? So you'll be a good manager, you'll be a better manager if the way that you're managing is sustainable for you. And like that is a totally reasonable conversation to have with your directs about. Just make sure that you're conscious of the power dynamic and that you're not pushing them into anything that they're uncomfortable with. You're trying to have an open dialogue about how you maximize the connection between you, given the realities of the world being round.
Thanks. I agree. Have the conversation. And I think if you're committed to strong remote culture, these are the types of negotiations that end up being worked out in real time. And it's not going to be the same for your next team and your next set of direct reports as it was for this one. But not being conscientious of it and not having the conversation, somebody's going to get real tired, real burned out, sick, and or leave. All right. What advice do you have for getting quieter people's contributions remotely, either by text or voice and video? I have a few tips and tricks on this one. The simplest is that I start every meeting hearing everybody's voice. And so I will ask a prompting question at the beginning of every meeting I run. Sometimes it's formal, like, hey, what do you need to leave behind right now to be fully present at the meeting, right? If you just know there's a lot going on in people's lives. And sometimes it's, what's the last great book you read that you think the rest of us should read? Or the last great movie you saw? And sometimes it's for the content. And more important than the content often, it's to warm up everybody and remind everybody that they have a place in this meeting, right? We hear their voice. Everybody has a chance to be heard, to practice, to say the things that they need to say. And then you've carved out that space for them, lest you just have the same people who talk all the time when you're in person, talking all the time when you're on video. And it's incredibly frustrating. And you will start to see people kind of fade away. You'll see people turn their video off. Or in the one case of a training that I walked into once, you'll see people passing around a bong. And you know what? They forgot to turn their video off. And that's a true story. I was like, hey, you don't have to be really into this, but could you turn your video off? Just don't want to see you all smoking that bong. But hey, you know, all kinds of things can happen. And so when you start to see people like shutting video off when it's like at weird times, you just know that they're like done with the people who take up all the airtime. Cate, do you have anything?
Yeah, I know. I love that. I think it's really important. Like, obviously, if you're going to get high during a meeting, you should eat it rather than smoke it. Is that not what we were supposed to take from that? Okay. So one thing that I do is a lot of one-on-one coaching about getting people to surface their opinion, either by text or by voice. So something I've noticed with onboarding people into a remote distributed culture, like I have to onboard them into written communication and talk about how this kind of post replaces this kind of meeting. They should, you know, if they have great thoughts on something, then I'll be talking about like where they should be sharing them and why and how that's important. And so just a lot of coaching on that. Similarly to Nicole, in all my meetings, like everybody has to speak. So I start all my meetings with something I call hashtag feelings. Feelings is all capital, feelings time. And everyone has to say how they feel, you know, and then you know, often if I'm doing kind of a discussion, then everyone gets to choose who goes next. And so it's a way to kind of keep people paying attention to who's spoken and who hasn't. And I found that's really nice. I think there's an argument that says not everybody wants to have to speak up in a meeting. But I do think it's really important that everybody's voice is heard. And so kind of working out with that person how they can make sure that they are expressing their opinion in a way that's comfortable for them is really important.
I'm going to move to one from the Q&A queue that's on here. Revisiting the concept of wellness. How do we encourage people to walk, get outside, exercise, aka step away from the computer without fear or anxiety about not producing or thinking that people notice they are offline? Well, I have very strong opinions about this one. So on my team, we take wellness very, very seriously. And it's actually why we became a fully distributed company, because we figured out that given the personalities we had on our team, folks were much more inclined to take good care of themselves when they controlled their day. And so the goal was always, and my team is small, I don't run a 20,000 person, organization. But it was really helpful in that when people stepped away, there was no shame in stepping away. And they could either say, I'm stepping away for a little while to go for a walk, or they just weren't available at that time and it wasn't a big deal. It was, hey, I noticed you stepped away. I'm gonna leave a question here. Just hit me up when you get back. For the length of a walk or a yoga class or coffee with your spouse in your kitchen, or whatever it is, the world is not gonna come crashing down. And if we can demonstrably remove that stigma of not being in front of your computer, then people will do it more freely without shame or worry or fear. And if you as a manager can please model this, the rest of your team is going to benefit from it. So if you say, hey everybody, I just want to let you know, since we're working remotely, normally on Tuesdays from 12 to 1:30, I go and do yoga. And so that's a time when you should just know that normally we all be at lunch and I'd be at yoga, and that's fine. Just want to let you know that's what's going on. And then people go, wait, manager said they were stepping away. That's really cool, because they will match your pace. They will match your pace no matter what it is, because of all the unspoken rules we have around pleasing our bosses and pleasing our managers. And so if you can model that good behavior, especially in a time when we are all leaving work because there's a sickness that we're trying not to contract, taking good care of yourself, keeping your immune system strong, getting good sleep, staying hydrated has to be at the top of your list, because what good is it for us to send everybody home if we're just going to make everybody sick anyway? So, Cate?
I think you covered everything. I think the one thing I would say is most urgency in corporate America is fully manufactured and isn't real. And so I think, to Nicole's point, a lot of things can wait 30 minutes, they can wait an hour, they can even wait 2 hours. And some things would benefit from waiting a day, because we would result in a better decision rather than a reactive decision. Mm-hmm. And so kind of just generally operating in a slightly calmer way is very good for wellness. And I think Nicole's points about modeling that behavior yourself as a manager is really, really the most impactful thing that you can do. I think I also need to clarify for Lauren that I wasn't advocating for getting high in meetings. I was really just joking about the bomb. I'm so sorry.
Let's see. We've got lots of questions, and Amanda just wanted me to point out to you all that so many of you are dropping just gems of resources in the chat, and Amanda is collecting all of those. And when we send the video out to you, we'll also share the links that you're sharing in there, because this is really, really wonderful. Okay, here is another. Well, I think we went up to this one. How do you keep water cooler style culture without asking invasive questions awkwardly during meetings? Sometimes you're going to ask questions awkwardly during meetings, and that's okay, as long as it's coming from the manager. Your direct reports are going to let you know pretty quickly if they're like, no, keep it like G to PG. Like we don't need to go past that. And also know, culturally speaking, that this I learned from managing many people from the UK, being asked personal information like with no context right off the bat is extremely off-putting.
Oh, we don't like that. Yeah. Yeah. What are you looking for? Why would you want to know this?
You don't like that at all. And so, in working with people, especially, from the UK, saying like, okay, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask a question at the meeting, and it's going to be about your favorite, the best birthday you ever had, right? and right, exactly. And so, giving people a heads up, but keep it light. Movies, books are always a great way. Music, those are always good ways to ease people into this. This has been asked a couple of times now. How do you determine the cost benefit and cadence of bringing remote teams together in person, annually, twice yearly, quarterly, etc., for face-to-face interaction? Right now, don't do it, because we're trying to separate people from each other on account of this illness. Okay, on account of this virus. That's number one. Number two is, if this becomes a normal part of your cadence of your work, and you're trying to build a more remote friendly or remote first culture, ask people. They'll tell you. Bringing people together is wonderful, especially when folks genuinely like their work. They don't get to see each other all that often other than on video. Bringing them physically together is amazing. It is also a huge ask of people who have all kinds of responsibilities attached to their lives: elder care, child care, a fear of flying. Like, there's just a long list of things that I've learned over time that bringing people together in a mandatory way brings up. And so I would err on the side of less upfront, doing it less frequently upfront, until people tell you they want to see each other more. Distance lends enchantment, and really try and draw that out so that, I'll give you an example. When I was at GitHub, and we were at about, maybe like 500 people, all the way up to about 500 people, we did once a year, huge, big, whole company things. And that was great until it wasn't sustainable anymore, because the literal cost was just too great. At which point we had to decide how to break people up into smaller subgroups that were meaningful. Do we just get cross-functional groups and bring them together because it's going to be all, social time and us getting to build stronger relationships? That's an individual decision around, around your strategy. But I would err on the side of not bringing them together all that often up front. It is costly, and people start to resent having to leave home to come somewhere. Then what's the benefit of working from home? And you don't want to squander that early. All right, Cate, do you want to add something to that?
I think the only thing that is worth adding is that we often talk about bringing teams together, and then we forget that leadership teams still need to be teams too. And so, like, in a remote context or a distributed context, it's really important that you keep your leadership team a team, and that you do all the team building for your leadership teams that you do for your individual teams, because that ultimately is how teams work together more effectively.
Cate, why don't you take this last question? How do motivators change in a remote versus a local environment?
It's not clear to me that they do. Do you think they change?
I don't. The only thing that I've seen is people's desire to hold on to the ability to do remote work. And so in order to prove that it's working, then you get to things like they're working a lot, too much, too accessible, because they really want to hold on to the ability to keep working from home or to work remotely. And so I would say that in and of itself becomes the thing that moves people. Other than that, deadlines and deliverables, it shouldn't change dramatically in that regard. The other thing that actually ends up happening is there's a lot of really interesting organizational behavior research, I'm gonna geek out for a second, about things like whoever gets to sit in close proximity to leadership ends up making more and getting more opportunities for promotions. And when you remove the ability to do that, people have harder times like ingratiating themselves to leadership that ends up being really good, because unsung heroes start to get more visibility. And people who, I'm going to be crass, people who are just suck ups, there's not a lot to do. There's not a lot that translates to remote around that. Because if I'm pinging my CEO every single day and being like, just thought of you, had this article, it's pretty obvious that I'm just sucking up. And so it's sort of interesting in that it can become a great equalizer if you're running it well.
Oh, that's such a good point. Like, I do think presenteeism manifests very differently in a distributed environment versus a co-located environment. Like, in a co-located environment, the presenteeism is just like, to Nicole's point, like just like showing up, sucking up, and putting hours in. And in a distributed environment, like, we have these kind of like outcomes, you know, so we have how we've decided to communicate, we have the things that we're sharing in that regard. And so I find it more common to see people, air quotes, performing work, you know, so they'll generate a lot of written content, you know, but actually if you look into the written content, it's actually very shallow. They haven't really thought it through. They're just like generating this volume of like air quotes work, but it's not actually, it doesn't actually have good or meaningful outcomes.
That's all the time we have for today. Here are our Twitter handles. We're going to keep staying on Twitter, answering questions using RFRW, Ready for Remote Work. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be sending out the recording of this meeting shortly, as soon as it's ready. And I really thank Cate, Jeff, Danilo, and Amanda for being here today and helping us present hopefully some really valuable information to you all. Good luck out there, and get ready for remote work.